The journal entry, supposedly written mere hours after the event, should have been an extremely accurate and reliable record. Yet, if that's the case, then his later account, his sworn affidavit, was a complete fabrication. The two are totally irreconcilable. This is no minor discrepancy. This is, in fact, a complete deal breaker.
Karen Hyatt, who ran as a Republican for Utah State Senate District 6 in 2020 and lost, has produced a 2-hour video that carefully presents many of the polygamy denier arguments, titled Woe Unto You Scribes. Among other things, she questions the origin of D&C 132, which Clayton noted in his journal was dictated by Joseph Smith on the 12th of July, 1843. According to Hyatt, Clayton contradicted this journal entry in his 1874 affidavit. She believes this contradiction proves D&C 132, as it now reads, is fraudulent. Let's see how she gets to that conclusion.
His scribe Willard Richards recorded the following entry in Joseph's journal for July 12, 1843. Received a revelation in the office in presence of Hyrum and William Clayton. Richards included no details about what the revelation entailed, but editors of the Joseph Smith papers note that just 4 days later, Joseph gave his first public sermon on eternal marriage. So it's plausible that this may have been the subject of the revelation.
It's not only plausible, but we know D&C 132 discusses eternal marriage in the same language he used in his sermon. But that doesn't mean the revelation was limited to discussing eternal marriage. Clayton's reporting of the sermon has Joseph Smith saying he could not reveal the fullness of things until the temple is completed. It should be noted that our best account of this sermon comes from Clayton's journal.
Meanwhile, one of Joseph's clerks, William Clayton, is said to have kept a journal of his own during this time. Here's an entry from Clayton's personal journal, purportedly written on the same day, July 12th. This AM, I wrote a revelation consisting of 10 pages on the order of the priesthood, showing the designs in Moses, Abraham, David, and Solomon having many wives and concubines, etc. After it was wrote, Presidents Joseph and Hyrum presented it and read it to Emma, who said she did not believe a word of it and appeared very rebellious.
Clayton's entry documents not only the subject of the revelation missing in Richard's entry, but also Emma's perfectly understandable resistance.
It seems odd that Clayton's personal journal should include so many more details than the journal kept by Willard Richards on behalf of the prophet himself. Yet this entry by Clayton is heavily relied on as proof that Joseph received a revelation on polygamy, what would later become D&C Section 132.
It doesn't seem odd at all. Richards was keeping Joseph Smith's official journal to be used in compiling Joseph Smith's history, and Clayton was writing in his private journal. Not only that, but he was writing in what has been called his gap journal, where he could write more freely about polygamy. So the difference in content is not surprising, and it doesn't imply Clayton's journals have been falsified, as Hyatt suggests. In drawing this hasty conclusion, Hyatt couldn't be more wrong. On the 8th of June, 1844, Hyrum Smith responded to Austin Cowell's testimony in the Nauvoo Expositor that Hyrum had read the polygamy revelation to the High Council on the 12th of August, 1843. He didn't deny that the revelation included a discussion of polygamy. Instead, he claimed that the revelation he read to the High Council, that it was an answer to a question concerning things which transpired in former days and had no reference to the present time. When these minutes were published in the Nauvoo Neighbor on the 17th of June, 1844, an issue from which Hyatt will later quote, this passage was edited for clarity to read, Counselor H. Smith referred to the revelation read to the High Council of the Church, which has caused so much talk about the multiplicity of wives, that said revelation was in answer to a question concerning things which transpired in former days and had no reference to the present time. Now, does this sound like the content of the revelation was limited to eternal marriage? This corroborates Clayton's journal entry. Of course, Hyrum knew Emma had burned the revelation, and only a few people knew Bishop Newell K. Whitney possessed a copy made by his employee, Joseph Kingsbury, who was away from Nauvoo on a mission. So I ask the polygamy deniers, just who were the liars?
Let's take another look at the entry he allegedly made in his personal journal on July 12th, 1843.
Hyatt says allegedly because Clayton wrote that the revelation discussed polygamy, and according to her and other polygamy deniers, that's not possible. But in the city council minutes previously quoted, Hyrum admitted the revelation discussed the polygamists in former times, and that's all Clayton's entry says. So there's no justification for using the term allegedly. Next, she tries to cast doubt on the entry by focusing on another of its claims.
This AM, I wrote a revelation consisting of 10 pages on the order of the priesthood. After it was wrote, Presidents Joseph and Hyrum presented it and read it to Emma, who said she did not believe a word of it. But Clayton would later give a sworn affidavit written in his own hand that differs considerably.
She asserts that Clayton subsequently contradicted his journal entry, which, even if true, would have no bearing on the journal's authenticity. People do contradict themselves and can misremember or conflate things 30 years later. Clayton's affidavit, dated 16th of February, 1874, is in the LDS Church archives in the Joseph F. Smith collection of affidavits about celestial marriage. It is written and signed by William Clayton and notarized by Salt Lake City Notary Public John T. Kane.
And it's not just a question of embellishing the story, which is common when people tell stories decades after the fact. In Clayton's case, the contradictory details he gives in 1874 actually make up the core of his narrative, which is that on July 12th, Joseph and Hyrum came into the church office discussing Emma's obstinate opposition to polygamy. He recalls, Hyrum said to Joseph, if you will write the revelation on celestial marriage, I will take and read it to Emma, and I believe I can convince her of its truth, and you will hereafter have peace. Joseph smiled and remarked, you do not know Emma as well as I do. Hyrum very urgently requested Joseph to write the revelation by means of the Urim and Thummim, but Joseph in reply said he did not need to, for he knew the revelation perfectly from beginning to end. Joseph commenced to dictate the revelation on celestial marriage, and I wrote it. Hyrum then took the revelation to read to Emma. Joseph remained with me in the office until Hyrum returned. When he came back, Joseph asked him how he had succeeded. Hyrum replied that he had never received a more severe talking to in his life, that Emma was very bitter and full of resentment and anger. Joseph quietly remarked, I told you you did not know Emma as well as I did. Joseph then put the revelation in his pocket, and they both left the office. This is no minor discrepancy. Clayton's early account, his alleged journal entry, specifically says that Joseph and Hyrum went to see Emma together, but his later testimony completely revolves around Hyrum's going by himself. It's Hyrum who begged Joseph to write the revelation, Hyrum who took it to Emma, while Joseph waited with Clayton, and Hyrum who came back with the tale of being berated by Emma. This is, in fact, a complete deal breaker. The journal entry, supposedly written mere hours after the event, should have been an extremely accurate and reliable record. Yet, if that's the case, then his later account, his sworn affidavit, was a complete fabrication. The two are totally irreconcilable.
No, they are not totally irreconcilable. The problem is that the contradiction is only apparent and not as clear as Hyatt assumes. The journal entry doesn't say Joseph and Hyrum went together, only that both had presented and read the revelation to Emma. After it was wrote, Presidents Joseph and Hyrum presented it and read it to Emma. Hyatt assumes this had to be at the same time. Hyrum may have returned to the office and then both went to Emma together, but that's not essential. Joseph could have gone to Emma alone and later reported his failure to Clayton. The revelation was written in the morning, and by evening, Clayton could have learned about Joseph's failure. The journal entry is too vague to conclude that it contradicts Clayton's 1874 affidavit.
Why is this so important? Because according to William Clayton, the only three who were present when the polygamy revelation was received were himself, Joseph, and Hyrum, making Clayton the only living witness.
Yet Hyatt and other polygamy deniers have no problem with other revelations Joseph Smith dictated when only he and Oliver Cowdery were present, including D&C 42, which they like to quote for an apparent anti polygamy passage. After Joseph Smith's death, Cowdery was the only living witness to those revelations. So, pointing out that Clayton was the only living witness to D&C 132 is quite meaningless, especially since we have other evidence to consider.
In fact, his testimony is the only purportedly contemporaneous account of Joseph's receiving any such revelation, a revelation that contradicts everything Joseph ever taught about polygamy.
You can't say Clayton's journal entry contradicts everything Joseph Smith ever taught about polygamy. We don't have everything Joseph Smith taught about polygamy. I will return to this in a minute. Hyatt also mistakenly asserts that Clayton is the only purportedly contemporaneous account of Joseph Smith receiving any such revelation, meaning a revelation about polygamy. We have already discussed Hyrum's admission that the revelation he read to the High Council was about the multiplicity of wives, but that it pertained to things which transpired in former days and had no reference to the present time. Hyrum's spin on the revelation is unconvincing. He may have persuaded many church members because at the time, the only high counselor to speak out was Austin Cowles, whose affidavit was published in the Nauvoo Expositor on the 7th of June, 1844. We now have statements from 6 of the 15 men who heard Hyrum read the revelation to the High Council. 7 if you count William Marks, who made a statement that was recorded in the minutes of a meeting. I think it's safe to say Hyrum was the one who wasn't being honest. Now, returning to Hyatt's erroneous assertion that Clayton's journal entry contradicts everything Joseph Smith ever taught about polygamy, she will no doubt be surprised to learn that in Nauvoo, Joseph Smith did not teach that polygamy was an abomination. Quite the reverse. Barely 2 minutes into her video, Hyatt declares,
We can now examine thousands of original and contemporaneous documents, meaning documents created during Joseph's lifetime, for ourselves, thanks in large part to the Joseph Smith Papers Project. These documents demonstrate that Joseph Smith consistently opposed polygamy as an abomination.
Now, Joseph Smith denied living polygamy, but he didn't regard polygamy as an abomination. He told Hyrum he could eternally marry his dead wife by proxy and also marry his living wife for eternity, and he would have both wives in the resurrection. Joseph Smith's comments to the city council on the 10th of June, 1844, in response to the Nauvoo Expositor, contain some interesting disclosures. As published in the Nauvoo Neighbor on the 17th of June, 1844, the minutes read, the mayor said, they make a criminality for a man to have a wife on the earth while he has one in heaven, according to the keys of the holy priesthood, and that he preached on the stand from the Bible, showing the order in the ancient days, having nothing to do with the present times. Now, does that sound like Joseph Smith believed polygamy was an abomination? He evidently believed polygamy was a true principle and defended it from the pulpit, causing him to clarify that he wasn't advocating its practice in the present. The historical record simply does not support the Joseph Smith the polygamy deniers are trying to palm off onto the public.
Recognizing that Clayton fabricated at least one of his statements completely destroys his credibility as a witness, making it absolutely irresponsible to prioritize his testimony over Joseph's. Yet this is exactly what historians have done for over a century and a half.
What's irresponsible is prioritizing Joseph Smith's denials over the numerous testimonies of those who were involved in polygamy in Nauvoo, not all of whom followed Brigham Young. Being loyal to Joseph Smith and privileging his denials is not scholarly. Is it more probable that Joseph Smith lied, or that all the other witnesses fabricated their testimonies and documents? Hyatt has not demonstrated that Clayton fabricated his 1874 statement. Rather, she fabricated the contradiction to destroy Clayton's credibility and preserve Joseph Smith's integrity. The person who had the motivation to lie was Joseph Smith. He was trying to keep the church together and himself out of jail. He became so desperate that he made the mistake of destroying the press of the Nauvoo Expositor, which ultimately led to his death. Destruction of the Expositor is evidence of Joseph Smith's consciousness of guilt.